There's kind of two things that I tend to lean back on. The first one is alignment between the teams. You're having one individual person or one team responsible for looking across the entire customer facing function and funnel to help answer some of those really critical business questions to get the entire team aligned around the data. And then I think the second piece of it is just constantly looking for ways to make the entire team more efficient through automation. The average SDR or sales rep starting at a company probably gets handed 10 logins on day one. And in theory, it should make their job easier, but I think often it's a lot of process glommed on top of a lot of disparate systems. And a great RevOps person is trying to think about, how do I make this entire job simpler to elevate the person to do more critical thinking, rather than how do I build a process that makes them work in a rote way through all these things.
I'm Devin Reed.
And I'm Sheena Badani.
And you're watching Reveal, the Revenue Intelligence podcast powered by Gong.
Keep watching here to see the full interview. Or if you like to listen to podcasts on the go, check out the links in the description below.
And if you like what you hear, subscribe on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, or Spotify. Or all of them. Why not? And while you're there, make sure to leave us a 5-star review. We personally read every single one, and I think I speak for both of us when I say they mean the world to us.
Could not agree more, Devin. Now, without further ado, here's the episode you've been waiting for.
Liz, thank you for spending some of your Wednesday hanging out with me. I am very excited to have you on the show.
Super excited to join you.
And so we are here to talk about how to build and scale your RevOps team. Now, I'm excited for this because I've been in sales, I've been close to sales ops, but I've never really worked closely with a RevOps team before. And I know it's a somewhat newer function, or maybe that's not even true, and I'm already wrong, but I'm excited because I know you're gonna school me a little bit and share some of your knowledge on what exactly this function's all about.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, it's kind of funny. So I first wrote about RevOps, but under a different name, probably over a decade ago. And I was trying to call it BizOps at the time. And that has since gone away, and everybody is calling it RevOps and just coalesced around a name that I did not glom onto first. But I do think the concept of RevOps is super interesting, and the idea that you can consolidate and align all of your revenue generating functions and customer facing teams around one set of systems and processes and structure, and get everybody marching in the same direction.
Yeah.
That to me is just the core of what we're looking at here.
So, okay, that's a good point, because sometimes we're talking internally and we'll say biz/RevOps. Are those not the same? Should we just cut biz and go RevOps?
No, I just think most people are calling it RevOps now. It's just actually people have accepted that this is a thing and is a consolidated function. But I mean, there's still plenty of companies that haven't actually put these functions together and have individual sales ops, marketing ops, product ops, CS ops reporting into functional leadership. This is about consolidating functions that kind of already exist in a lot of places.
Okay, that's a good place to start. So maybe let's go a little deeper. We'll start chipping away at this thing. So what problems exactly does RevOps solve?
So in my mind, RevOps is bringing together the operational and back-end functions of your customer-facing team. So generally, that's marketing, sales, and CS ops. Depending on the size of the company, you might also have an account management team separate from CS or sales. Maybe that has its own operations function. And product ops sometimes falls under it too, depending on the go-to-market motion. But within that, each of those kind of functional areas has tooling, data, infrastructure. They're thinking about attribution. They're trying to get dashboards and insights from that data. They're defining the processes that each person on the team needs to follow, or that their tooling needs to follow. They're trying to automate and deleverage different parts of the process. They're probably enabling individuals, onboarding new people. I don't know, probably one of the original core functions of sales ops was something like deal desk, help this sales rep get this deal booked. And that takes sometimes a person, and ideally less of a person's time over time. So I think of each of those individual tasks and functions, some really strategic, some really tactical and execution oriented, getting all lumped together and being handed to this RevOps function and saying solve all the hard parts of this.
Okay, I like it. This makes a lot of sense. So if I'm going to ask what they solve, let's talk about what does RevOps specifically not solve? What should they not be tasked or expected to accomplish?
Yeah, so where I see this go wrong tends to be you have like a sales leader or a marketing leader who's being tasked with like a big, hairy goal, like we don't have enough pipeline. And it's like, oh, we need a RevOps person. Like we definitely need
Mm,
RevOps. And it turns out bringing in RevOps doesn't magically create pipeline. It doesn't build like a sales strategy. It doesn't figure out how to take you to market. It is actually like creating the process and structure and reporting on your go-to-market strategy and on your go-to-market engine. And so when I think about, RevOps here, it's like think of them as the layer that helps you get things done better, faster,
mhm.
more efficiently, not necessarily like the decider or the doer of strategy and pipeline. They may be critical in helping you execute it, but they are not going to be the overnight, like snap your fingers solution to actually getting sales done.
Well, that makes a lot of sense. And there's also, at least in my experience, no magic bullet for a pipeline overnight either way. So good to know it's not
Yeah.
RevOps either. So we're still on the hunt for that. Okay, what's the risk if a company doesn't get RevOps in place? And I know that the answer might depend on like the maturity of the company, but I guess what's at risk if you just ignore this function overall?
Yeah, I definitely do think it depends on stage. But I think that there's kind of two things that I tend to lean back on. The first one is alignment between the teams. And so I'll like throw myself to like way back when working with a company where I remember the CEO asking a question of like, how much revenue did we book this month? Or how many leads did we book? Or how many leads did we create this month? And you go to your marketing leadership and you ask that question, and marketing is going to say, like, we got 400 MQLs. And then sales is going to be like, we only got like 270 and only like X number of those became opportunities. And you end up with like four different answers to the same question, depending on who you asked. And what ends up happening is like people are pulling that data from different systems. You have your marketing automation tool, you have your CRM, you're like going and looking in different places. And with the rise of a more self-service and product-led motion, you have this whole other set of tools too, which we can talk about.
Yeah.
But I think the key here is like you're having one individual person or one team responsible for looking across the entire customer facing function and funnel to help answer some of those really critical business questions to get the entire team aligned around the data, and then therefore like the systems and processes that back it up. And then I think the second piece of it that I kind of come back to of like why RevOps is like so critical is just constantly looking for ways to make the entire team more efficient through automation. And that comes back to the tooling side of things. And in a world where now I think we have just every individual person is logging into so many software products every day.
Yeah.
And I think the average, I'll take sales as the example in this one, the average like SDR or sales rep starting at a company probably gets handed like 10 logins on day one. And in theory, it should make their job easier. But I think often it's a lot of process glommed on top of a lot of like disparate systems. And a great
Mhm.
RevOps person is trying to think about how do I make this entire job simpler to elevate the person to do more critical thinking rather than how do I build a process that makes them like work in a rote way through all these things.
Yeah.
So I don't know that like alignment on one hand and automation on the other are the two things I come back to.
No, definitely. That definitely makes sense. Yeah, having sold to sales ops, I think it was sales ops. That was something I heard a lot, which is like, how do we get this tool inside of Salesforce? And I'm like, well, why is that
Yeah.
so important? It's like, because I don't want more tabs. I don't want more places where my people are working. And of course, as the
Or
rep, I'm
another
like,
place they can get locked out of.
yeah, oh yeah, also true. And of course, as the rep trying to get a deal done, I'm like, what's one more tab really gonna do? But to your point, yeah, like I've talked to sales reps, especially the SDRs. You're absolutely right. I think like there's
Yeah.
so many tools out there, and they're kind of like a little bit more niche. You need a video tool if you're going to do prospecting, but then that fits into your prospecting tool. Does that talk to your CRM? Before you know, it's like there's so many different things. It's hard for reps to know where to start and where to spend their time.
Yeah. And am I looking at my dashboard in Gong, or am I looking at in Sales Loft or Outreach, or am I going back into like Salesforce? And now I've
Hmm.
got three different places where somebody's trying to coach me,
Yeah.
and like which one is even true?
Yeah, exactly. Well, let's dive in a little bit more here because you're a partner at Stage 2 Capital. So you get to see under the hood of countless companies. What are the most common misconceptions about RevOps?
Well, common misconceptions. That's a good one. I mean, I guess first probably comes back to this like idea of like what it's going to solve, and that like it's like a lightning bolt or like a
Yeah.
magic bullet that's going to solve some like really critical business issue. And yeah, it's like really helpful and you should have it and you should build it early and you should scale it with your team. But I don't think it's this like overnight great success that solves all other challenges in a business. Um, and then the second, I think, kind of comes down more to how you start to think about like building the team. And often I find that people look at like, all right, I'm going to go build RevOps. And so I'm going to take the best BDR we have. It's probably like 22 or 23. We're going to like promote them. And we've got like our RevOps person. And I share that because that was my path. I started in sales operations way back when. But I remember, like, I was really young. I didn't really know what I was doing. And somebody was like, you're now responsible for like the operational components of the sales team. And, not to say it's always a mistake, but I think you got to get the right infrastructure in place to support that person.
Right.
Often, like, the people that are in RevOps roles like have only seen it in maximum like one or two other companies. So
Hmm.
they don't know what they don't know.
Sure.
And so figuring out how to help them like fill that gap. RevOps is not the same at every company. The fact that somebody, saw a great function somewhere else doesn't mean that that's what you need today.
Right.
That was a lot of different answers to one question.
Well, no, but it's helpful because I think you've mentioned it a couple of times where people just assume RevOps is going to solve this big problem. And I think it's because people don't really understand what RevOps does.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Because if you really understood, if you understand what marketing does or what their job is, then you know
Mm-hmm.
what goals they're going to accomplish and what they're not. RevOps is kind of, by the way you're describing it, a bit of a cure-all. By the way it's perceived, but obviously not in reality. I've worked with a lot of ops folks. I'm very grateful for all of them. They're always pulled in a million different directions. So how do you prioritize what to do, what to say no to, what to say later to? Do you have any maybe
Yeah.
advice there?
I might split this up into two. I think first, it's like if you are new in a RevOps function joining a company, it's really easy to start by being reactive to all the stuff that is thrown at you. And I mean, I guess this actually like can kind of work across the entire time you're there. But
Yeah.
if you're in your first couple of months, like there is a backlog and like years of debt that you are dealing with. And if you just start like taking those down in order, you are not going to get anywhere. So I think for like the new RevOps person joining a team, really taking time to take stock, like figuring out who your key stakeholders are, what are their biggest business challenges, and making sure that you're like solving for like what does success look like? I don't know, 3, 6, 9, 12 months down the road, pick your number, and actually tackling some of those big strategic problems at the same time you're working on the quick
Mhm.
wins is really important. Like you have to have a longer term plan. And then similarly, if you are like a team of RevOps people sitting in seat, there are kind of like two parts of your time. There's the what are we trying to get done over the next quarter and biting off some of the bigger projects, which is really like relentless prioritization. And then there is figuring out how to tackle the one-offs that do come up. And I think the one of the key challenges of RevOps is like you could spend your entire day or week on go fetch missions. Like Devin, you've worked in sales,
Yeah.
like people are asking questions all the time. Where do I find this contract? How do I use this system? What's the, number of leads we got this week? How do I access this? And if you get stuck in that pattern, it's like very hard to break out of it. And so I generally tell people to try to like do that sort of time analysis of where do you find you're spending the most time, and that can be a really good like guiding force for where you think about trying to automate things next. It can be indicative of where somebody needs enablement and can be indicative of like where you need a dashboard or to automate some of the reporting that's
Mhm.
happening and sending it out on a regular basis. But if you're looking at the inbound stuff, it's often like a good indicator of what needs to happen next on a strategic priorities level.
So you had mentioned your first role. Was that were you joining an existing like mature RevOps company, or excuse me, RevOps team and company, or were you like the first person? And the reason I ask is I imagine folks might be wondering, when is the right time to invest in RevOps?
Yeah. So my example is probably like not the ideal one. I was an acquisition of a smaller company into a public company that had very distinct marketing versus sales versus CS versus services operations teams. And I was sort of like the cross-functional person supporting one subsidiary. So like
Super smooth.
probably not like what people are going to be doing. Yeah.
Yeah.
But I do think that question is the right one, which is like, when is the right time to invest and what does that really look like? And I will honestly say, I think this needs to be like a much earlier hire. Um, I'm looking at it as early as, you brought your first sales leader in and have a few reps in seat. You have, and obviously it depends on the go-to-market motion. You have your first, two marketing hires, generating leads, thinking about systems. And the way that it usually comes about is like somebody early on in the business is doing this function or doing like some of these tasks, whether or not they're actually calling it RevOps, right?
Sure,
Like someone's time is like, we need to set up HubSpot. We need it to talk to these other systems. We need to make sure that like we're telling our investors, how many leads we've created and what the funnel looks like, and what channels are working best for us. So like those things are happening. What I tend to find is that the right thing to do is to bring in some sort of like outsourced RevOps service earlier in a business. You don't need a dedicated RevOps person, but you'd really benefit from learning from a whole bunch of these implementations over time. Like if you've used like Salesforce, you've seen how badly it can be implemented, how badly most people implement it.
Yep.
So like, what if you got somebody who's seen it like hundreds of times to like help you see around the corners and minimize some of those mistakes? So I think about it as like as early as possible, ideally in a fractional way to like learn from the mistakes of others and get some of the best practices in place. And then I feel like there's a tipping point where like you're realizing that you have bigger projects to tackle and you feel like it can be a force multiplier for the other leaders in your business. And that generally is either going to happen when like your marketing leader isn't spending as much time as they could or should on like actual marketing activities and is instead buried in the systems,
Right.
or similarly like your sales leader is. And I think when like one of the two of those is going to be the tipping point, it's like, okay, we actually need somebody thinking through like the systems, the data, the insights that are coming out of what we're doing to help guide us.
Yeah. I know on the marketing side, I think we got Kyle, who's our marketing ops guru. I think he was like the sixth, seventh marketer, like definitely very early on, who taught me to always keep operations happy because they make all things happen. So that makes a lot of sense. I don't remember when we got our first kind of like sales ops person, but I want to say it was around maybe like a dozen or so reps. So that's an interesting guidance. Does it matter? Like,
and Devin, I also do think it's happening earlier and earlier. So like, even if I look like 5 years ago, it was very different than like now. I think it's just moving earlier in the life cycle of a company.
Absolutely. Does it matter if you go from that fractional approach to like full-time employee, like manager level, director, 20 years in the game? And I don't mean to go like title because I know that can vary, but you know what I mean? Like what kind of level would you recommend?
Yeah. So I tend to think of this in terms of like jobs to be done. And it takes a lot of like time and effort to do this well. Like RevOps isn't just RevOps. You need to like sit down and detail out what are the biggest priorities for the company right now. You might sit down and do that and say, the most important thing for us to have is like attribution of our marketing channels, a like clear dashboard for like the activities of the sales org, and deal desk. Another business might sit down and do that and say, hey, we're onboarding 20 reps in the next few months. We need like really strong enablement and like the processes and systems that allow them to be successful. And like those people don't look the same.
Sure.
So I think the expectation that like every RevOps person should be able to do all of those things is a trap a lot of people fall into. And instead, if we think of it as like this job's to be done or like what success looks like 6 or 12 months down the road, we can find someone and build around them. I generally see the first hire being somebody with sort of like mid-level experience. You probably can hire a few people under them. Maybe they grow with you. Maybe you bring in someone more senior to take over more functions over time. But sort of like not so junior that they haven't seen it anywhere
Right.
else, and not so senior that when, you think about like the many things I just described, they're like, okay, we need to hire 3 people to do
Right.
those
Yeah.
because it's just like not the reality of an early stage company.
Sure.
Um, and then secondarily, I think I come back to if you've been outsourcing some of this or you have this fractional support, it doesn't necessarily mean you turn them off. Like you can think of that as
Mm.
sort of like supplement, right? Or
Right.
complement, where you have a RevOps person that's going to own these 3 functions, and maybe they're going to project manage an outsourced resource who's only working 4 or 5 hours a week to make sure that like the data insights are really like crystallized in a dashboard for everyone, or that like they're writing Apex so that like the Salesforce workflows work. Like you
Yeah.
can pick like what thing you need to outsource, but you don't need everybody to be able to do every single part of this.
That makes a lot of sense. Okay, so for companies or leaders who are at companies who are maybe larger, more mature, and they might say, hey, we've got this whole engine going, but we don't have
Yeah.
RevOps as part of it. That might be even more intimidating or seemingly more challenging because you've already got this big, this big engine humming or at least working. So, what's your advice for those folks? Like, how do you get started with RevOps when you're in a more mature, larger organization?
I guess I have to imagine that it's happening. You're just calling it something different because when we think about all the types of tasks and like projects and strategies we've described so far, you probably have somebody reporting into these various functions who's taking care of a lot of it.
Yeah.
Like you didn't get to be a big company by not having someone thoughtfully implementing your technology. Like someone is asking someone for data and
Right. Right.
insights. Someone is helping to onboard the sales team. Somebody is helping marketing. And like when you do it that way, like I think it's more a question of like, is there benefits to consolidating those functions or not?
Mm,
And I think the pros and cons that come up there, one, I think RevOps often gets kind of lumped into sales ops and gets put under the sales leader or CRO.
hmm
And if that's the case, and then marketing is sitting as a peer to the head of sales, but marketing's operational resources are reporting into sales, it can feel like this like beg, borrow, steal, like
Right.
I still don't have the support I need. And that doesn't feel good. So if you're going to do it, particularly in a more like mature company, you're going to start consolidating those resources. I think it's like a really positive thing to do and creates better alignment. But the way to do it is to give the RevOps leader a seat at the table who can actually be a strategic peer to your sales and marketing leader.
Right.
Right? Like they need to be on the same level and have a voice in the room, not kind of like indirectly getting information funneled to them through one area or the other of the business. And if you do have that person as a peer and that like support role can actually like think about aligning resources to each piece of the
Sure.
business, it becomes a much easier thing to bite off.
Yeah.
But it's a big investment.
Well, I mean, it's kind of like not to pit marketing and sales against each other more than probably already perceived, but it can be a mediator of sorts, right? They might have a perspective that sales and the marketing leader don't see independently. So it makes sense they can kind of bring them together.
Yeah. And then like layer in customer success and account management and like PQL is coming from product and
Yeah.
this new like growth team that's got spun up and we've got a data analyst over here. Like, yeah, like mediator is a great word. They're the person who's sitting in the center actually getting to see it all.
That makes sense. Okay. So whether you have RevOps today or you have RevOps today, but don't call it RevOps, what are some of the pitfalls to look out for as folks are looking to scale?
Yeah, it's a really good question. So I think one is sort of that piece I was describing of making sure they have a seat at the table and making sure that you have like the right peer, like say that again, the right person who can be a peer to marketing and sales,
Mhm.
can push back, is viewed as strategic, and is viewed as like a, a senior leader who has like a seat at the table,
Right.
not someone who is taking orders from others. And that shift, I think, is really important, particularly as this function is like growing over time. You don't want it to be like the most junior person in the room or the person that everybody is telling, like, I need this.
Yeah.
That they need to be setting their own agenda. That's one. And then the second, I think, is you look at like actually how the team builds. RevOps, maybe more than any other function, can get like highly specialized over time. I mean, this happens in every portion of a
Right.
business, right? Like your early generalist marketer gets split into so many different things and different departments within marketing. So there's a parallel
Right.
here. But in RevOps, like, eventually you're going to have somebody probably thinking specifically about data and insights and thinking about your BI tools. You'll have somebody who is aligned to enablement. You'll have somebody thinking about deal desk or rules of engagement. You'll have somebody focused on marketing attribution. And when you start breaking those down, you need to make sure that you're being really like thoughtful with how you structure your team and really open in the dialogue of like who's going to be doing what. Or I think you end up turning people over. And so you need to make sure you understand the skill sets and where people want to go. And I think those are like the two biggest ones I see is kind of structure of the team and making sure that it's like an elevated enough function and has a say in what's going on.
Absolutely. No, that makes a lot of sense. Okay. Everyone has followed all of your advice in an ideal world, right? Now they're like, okay, but how do I know if it's working? So in other words, Liz, how do you measure success of a RevOps team? Are there certain indicators that you're looking for?
Yeah, so I think within the team, let's start like within and we'll talk like externally too. Within the team, I think it's like what is the agenda you're setting and whether you call it goals, OKRs, projects, don't really care, but like there should be some strategic agenda that you are marching towards that you are setting goals for the team to deliver against. And then there is also this reactive component to the business and making sure that you're actually staffed to respond to what's needed in real time. So I think some measurement of like throughput and capacity is really important, both at the strategic level and like this more like task management type thing. So that's how I would think about like evaluating the team itself. And then externally, as I think about like sales leadership and marketing leadership, I think like any other executive, it's more oriented towards like, are those cross-functional teams getting what they need? Do they feel supported? And are like, is RevOps living up to whatever the team mission is that has been defined for them at that point? And so if I, think about some of the things that could be on that like leader's plate, it's about optimizing the like sales force, whether that's through enablement or automation. It comes down to like, is the team delivering against the revenue number? Similarly, on the marketing front, it's providing them with the insights to make decisions that they need in order to allocate budget and like manage channels. So I think that is really more of it can be quantified, but it's often like a qualitative assessment between peers of like, am I getting what I need from your team?
No, that makes a lot of sense. So Liz, we've covered a lot of ground. Now there's one question that I withhold from the preparation doc that I sent you, not to put you on the spot, but it's one question we ask all of our guests, and I'm going to tweak it a little bit because we talked about RevOps today. So how would you describe RevOps in one word?
Critical.
I like it. I like it. One of my favorite parts is...
Does that work?
It works. Absolutely works. I love seeing people's thinking face because people take this question very seriously. Maybe because I really, kind of built the anticipation before asking it.
Wait, let me get like the impression of my thinking face. What did I do there? Deer in headlights?
No, it wasn't deer in the headlights. It was like almost like, if you had a beard, you'd probably like, do the little beard stroke a little. And you're like, I saw a lot of care and thought going into it. Some people do give deer in the headlights and they're kind of like, oh God. And then they like pause.
God damn it, you put me on the spot.
Yeah. Which I promised at the beginning. I'm like, no gotcha journalism happening on the show. But then here we are. Well, fantastic. Liz, thank you very much for breaking down RevOps, how to build and scale a RevOps team. We are very appreciative and thanks for hanging out with us.
Thank you.